Craig Dwight Williamson was born in 1944 and spent his life as a fisherman and farmer. When he was 46 years old, he met 41-year-old Christine Reinhard, and the two fell quickly in love. Within a month of meeting, they married. Both were interested in fish farming, so they bought a farm in Christine's home state of Wisconsin, where they began raising tilapia.
Some of these will be filleted out in our processing plant. Some will be delivered to the East Coast as live whole fish to the Oriental market.
On August 28, 1993, Craig left on a road trip to Colorado Springs to drum up business, but had unfortunately suffered a concussion a few weeks earlier. Christine was incredibly worried about him driving, but there was no way around it. After arriving in Colorado Springs, he drove his bus to a motel and checked in. He then rented a car to drive around the city, so he didn't have to drive the bus. That night at 9 p.m., he called Christine and, as usual, asked her to call him in the morning to wake him up. However, when she called, he didn't answer, so she notified the police and reported him missing. After that, someone found his credit cards on a shelf in a grocery store in El Paso, Texas, over 600 miles south of Colorado Springs. 2 weeks later, his rental car was found abandoned in Juarez, Mexico. However, the detective from Colorado found no signs of foul play. Missing along with Craig was $2,500 in cash. Christine then decided to go search for him herself. She arrived in Colorado Springs on September 14th and discovered the bus still at the motel along with his luggage and other belongings. She believed he may have been attacked on the day he vanished, but there was no evidence of a struggle in his hotel room. When the story about his disappearance was featured on the news in both Colorado and Wisconsin, a nurse came forward by the name of Judy Inman and reported seeing a man matching Craig's description traveling on a train from Montana to Washington. She said the man appeared disheveled and was talking about fish tanks. She also believed he said his name was Craig. As a nurse, she felt certain the man was suffering from a head injury. Believing the man might be Craig and that he was in Washington, which is where they originally met, she headed that way. For the next 6 weeks, she visited the locations along the train route, but no signs of him was found. She then met up with Judy on December 26, 1993, and showed her a photo of Craig. Judy said the man on the train closely resembled Craig. She also said she thought he got off in Wishram, Washington. So Craig's son went there and placed missing person flyers, but nothing ever came of it. Investigators began to believe that he was murdered or staged his own disappearance. Christine, on the other hand, believed he was attacked by unknown assailants and they stole his rental car and credit cards. Unfortunately, after his disappearance, Christine was forced to close the fish farm. Craig's disappearance was then aired on Unsolved Mysteries on May 25, 1994, but sadly, nothing came of it, at least not yet. When the episode was re-aired in July of 1995, a man living in Key West, Florida, was shocked when he saw the episode. That man was none other than Craig Williamson. He claimed he had been attacked and robbed while in Colorado and had developed amnesia. The amnesia was worse due to the concussion he suffered a month before his trip. Unfortunately, he couldn't remember much besides the attack and claimed he woke up in the hospital with the name Ron on his wristband. Not knowing who he was, he wandered around the United States before ending up in Key West, where he got a job as a diver. Even though he recognized himself from the episode, he claimed he couldn't remember Christine or his family. Within a few days of the episode re-airing, he and Christine were reunited. In an attempt to jog his memory, they traveled to Colorado Springs, but the trip was unsuccessful. Sadly, they decided to divorce but remained friends. He then moved to California while she started a new life in Wyoming. Investigators are still suspicious of his amnesia claims and believe he staged his own disappearance in order to escape the debts and responsibilities of the fish farm. Craig and Christine had used all their savings on the farm and took out a loan in the amount of $400,000. A lot of people believe he married her just to fulfill his dream of becoming a fish farmer, but once the business began failing, he decided to bail. It's also said that Christine and him were far from compatible and were completely two different people. It's thought that added to his decision to walk away. One piece of evidence that does lend credit to the investigators is the beard trimmings found in the rental car. It appeared to them that Craig was trying to alter his appearance, and they didn't feel like someone suffering from amnesia would have done that. Plus, they found it strange that the bus he drove to Colorado had nothing to hold fish, such as a cooler, tanks, or fish food. There's also the name Ron on his wristband in the hospital. If that part of the story is true, where did they get the name Ron? When asked what hospital it was and where it was located, he claimed he couldn't remember. As for the sighting of him on the train, it remains unknown if that was really him. One of Craig's children posted online that during his marriage to Christine, he slept on the couch because he was a light sleeper. She also said she was never a huge fan of Christine's. She said she was just happy to have her father back, but said he now suffers from severe headaches and continues to have memory issues. What do y'all think? Did he really have amnesia, or was the whole story made up? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. As for Christine, in 1996, after they were divorced, she married Herbert Howells and remained with him until he died in 2019. Laurel Jean Mitchell was born the middle child on May 24, 1958, to parents Dick and Wilma in Whitley County, Indiana. In the late summer of 1975, 17-year-old Laurel was working at Cokesbury Inn, a snack bar at the Epworth Forest Church Camp, and was getting ready to start her senior year at Wawasee High School. She loved to sing and was a member of the God's Children Choir at Epworth Forest. She had plans to attend business college, but would sadly never get the chance. On Wednesday, August 6, 1975, she left work at 10 p.m. and began walking to Adventureland a mile away to meet up with some friends, but never made it. The last sighting of her was by her friend Scott Pruitt, who saw her walking by the entrance to the Epworth Forest. When Laurel failed to return home that night, her parents called the police at 4:16 a.m. and reported her missing. The next morning at 10:30 a.m., Glenn Dixon and his son were fishing on the Elkhart River in Noble County when they found her body. An autopsy determined she had been sexually assaulted and drowned in the river. On the night she was abducted and murdered, Frank Overmyers and his wife heard a loud car and saw it turn around and stop near their home. He then heard what sounded like the trunk of a car shutting. When he stepped outside, he saw two cars leaving the area. One was a red or orange 1971 Oldsmobile, and the other was a green Mustang. Catherine Flynn, who lived nearby, said she heard several voices say, "Let's get her." The case would then go unsolved for over 40 years, but thankfully they were able to preserve Laurel's clothes and jewelry. Sadly, both her parents passed in 2012 without ever learning who murdered their daughter. With little to no leads in the case, investigators began to believe her murder would never be solved. Even when Indiana State Police Captain Kevin Smith took it on in 2014, people at the department tried to encourage him to let the case go. However, he was certain the case could be solved and proceeded on. While re-interviewing potential witnesses, he learned that a youth singing group known as Celebrate the Sun performed at the Cokesbury Inn that evening and left around the same time as Laurel. He eventually tracked down the members of the group, but they weren't able to provide any new information. In 2013, Renee Sexton called the Noble Sheriff's Department and said that she went on a date with John Wayne Lehman, and they ended up at a party. After the party, while they were driving home, Lehman admitted that he was involved in Laurel's murder along with his friend Fred Bandy Jr. At the time, Renee was 16, and both Lehman and Bandy were either 19 or 20 years old. A year later, on July 3, 2014, Bill McDonald went to the Ligonier Police Department and said that he hung around Fred Bandy Jr. and that he had confessed to murdering Laurel. Then, on September 25, 2019, Rick Johnson was interviewed by investigators and said that while at the party with McDonald, Bandy, Lehman, and some others, Bandy once again confessed to the murder and said that he and Lehman were both involved. Investigators were able to determine that Bandy owned a 1971 Oldsmobile at the time of the murder. In order to prove the men were involved, investigators sent Laurel's clothes off for DNA testing, and by February 2020, a male DNA profile was generated. They then obtained a DNA sample from Bandy Jr., and it matched the DNA found on Laurel's clothes. On Monday, February 6, 2023, investigators arrested Bandy Jr. and Lehman and charged them with Laurel's murder. At the time of Bandy's arrest, he was on the sex offender registry for sex crimes against a minor. Lehman, on the other hand, had no criminal record. It will be interesting to see if Lehman is convicted since there is no DNA evidence against him. However, as of 2024, both men are awaiting trial. Lucille Minor Johnson was born on July 11, 1912, in Eureka, Utah. She graduated from the LDS Business College and then married Howard Johnson in 1933. Sadly, Howard passed away on August 5, 1989. In early 1991, 78-year-old Lucille was a mother, grandmother, and widow living in Holiday, Utah. She was also the president of Southern Utah Broadcasting and the president of a family investment real estate group called Investment Center. On February 2, 1991, her daughter, Shirley England, came by her mother's house and made a horrific discovery. Lucille was found lying in her bed, beaten and strangled to death. When investigators arrived, they found Lego bricks on the living room floor. This was strange because her family said she was meticulous with keeping her house tidy and said she would have never left toys out unless her grandchildren were there, which they had not been. Interestingly, Lucille was known for wearing a ring and necklace, but those items were nowhere to be found. Investigators worked on the case for years, but stopped in 2006 when all leads ran out. In August 2013, the case was reopened, and DNA evidence collected under Lucille's fingernails was uploaded to CODIS and linked to John Edward Sansing, who was already in prison for murder in an unrelated case. Investigators then sought out Sansing's son, who was 5 years old at the time of the murder, and confirmed his fingerprints matched those found on the Lego bricks. This means that at least one son was in the home when he murdered Lucille, but they would later learn the entire family was actually there. Sansing's nephew, Chad, then came forward and told about an argument he overheard between Sansing and his wife. During the argument, Sansing's wife threatened to tell the police that he had murdered a lady in Utah. In 2018, Sansing revealed how he met Lucille. He said she brought her car in for service where he worked and had to leave it, so he gave her a ride back to her house. During the drive, he noticed she had on jewelry, which he figured he could sell for drug money, so he made a plan to come back and rob her. However, he didn't rob her on that day. Instead, he waited until February 2nd, found her phone number in the phone book, and called her. He said he was in the neighborhood with his family and that he was going to drop by. When he knocked on the door, she let him in and his family, including his wife, Kara, inside. Once inside, he asked to use the restroom, but instead began going through her rooms, looking for something to steal. However, she caught him in the act, so he murdered her. 4 years after the murder, he moved from Utah to Arizona, where he remained until he was arrested for the murder of Trudy Calabrese in 1998. Trudy's murder occurred on February 24, 1998, when Sansing called the Living Spring Assembly of God Church and requested food for him and his family. Trudy, a social worker who worked for the church, showed up with 2 boxes of food a little after 4 p.m., unaware that she was walking into a nightmare. Sansing had a drug addiction and planned to rob Trudy when she arrived, even informing his wife Kara of his plans. Once inside, Sansing, high on drugs, tied her up with the help of Kara and proceeded to beat and sexually assault her. Afterward, he stabbed her to death, all while his kids and wife were in the next room. He then left her body in the bedroom and joined his wife back in the living room where they slept for the night. He then woke up in the middle of the night and moved Trudy's body to the backyard under some clothes. In the end, Sansing only netted $1.25 from Trudy. In 1999, he pleaded guilty to all the charges and was sentenced to death. As for his wife, Kara, she was also convicted of murder and sentenced to life in prison. In Lucille's case, Sansing pleaded guilty and was given life in prison without the possibility of parole. As of April 2024, John Sansing remains on death row, and Kara Sansing remains in prison. Marion Crofts was born in 1967 to Trevor and Ann and was the youngest of two siblings. On Saturday, June 6, 1981, 14-year-old Marion left her home in Fleet, Hampshire to ride the 4 miles on her bicycle to the Wavell School in Farnborough for band practice. Typically, her father would drive her, but on this particular day, he was playing in a cricket match. Unfortunately, she would never arrive and was never seen alive again. Between 9:30 and 10 a.m., as she was passing Laffins Road in Aldershot alongside the Basingstoke Canal, someone attacked her and dragged her into the woods where she was sexually assaulted and beaten to death. After being reported missing, a police dog discovered her body later that day, hidden in some undergrowth. Her clarinet was also discovered in the canal. Thankfully, investigators were able to collect evidence that would be used years later for DNA testing. Over the course of the investigation, Hampshire police said they questioned over 24,000 potential suspects, but everyone led to a dead end. Unbeknownst to them, one of those potential suspects was the actual killer. In 1999, a DNA profile was generated, but it didn't match to anyone in the UK DNA database. For the next 2 years, they continued checking, and finally, in 2001, thanks to a rule that required criminals to submit their DNA, a suspect by the name of Tony Jasinski was found. They got his DNA sample after he was arrested for assaulting his wife. After being added to the DNA database, it matched the DNA found on Marion. He was then subsequently arrested and charged with the sexual assault and murder of Marion. When his co-workers found out, they were shocked and described him as the nicest guy they could ever meet. They also said he would do anything to help anybody. At the time of the murder, 29-year-old Tony was a lance corporal in the Armed Catering Corps based in Aldershot. In 1976, he married Lynn Gowans, and the two were living about 1.5 miles from the crime scene. She was also pregnant at the time. In the end, a Winchester Crown Court jury found him guilty and sentenced him to life in prison. In 2014, he appealed the sentence, arguing that the DNA evidence showed that the murderer had a chromosome disorder and that it couldn't have been him. The judge in the case denied the appeal, referencing the fact that the DNA match was 1 in a billion. As for his wife, she called him a psychopath and said he deserved the prison sentence. Natasha Alexandra August Carter was born on December 22, 1989, and went by the nickname Alex. In August of 2000, 10-year-old Alex was living with her mother, 41-year-old Susan Gale Carter, and her stepfather, Larry Webb. Unfortunately, Alex's parents were going through a contentious custody dispute, and on August 8, 2000, Susan and Alex strangely disappeared. Believing she kidnapped Alex, a felony warrant for kidnapping was issued. However, they were not able to track Susan or Alex down, and neither were ever seen alive again. Their disappearance was even more concerning because Alex's grandmother said her granddaughter was terrified of her mother and did not want to live with her. Unfortunately, the case would go unsolved for over 20 years. In 2021, the case was reopened, and in 2022 and 2023, investigators searched Larry's home in Beckley for clues. While there, they found a bullet in a bedroom wall and took some floor tiles from the basement. When he was questioned, he said he had dementia and couldn't remember what happened to them. However, forensic testing on the bullet would prove otherwise. All these years later, the bullet still had traces of Alex's DNA on it. In October of 2023, Larry was indicted. However, due to Larry's declining health, he was held in a medical facility from 2023 until April 12, 2024, when he was finally taken into custody. He then confessed to the murders and told investigators where to find the bodies. He said he murdered Susan because money had gone missing and he believed she was spending a lot of it. This led to an argument between them and ended with him shooting her. He then shot and killed Alex to avoid being caught for Susan's murder. After both were dead, he stored the bodies in his basement before burying them in a shallow grave on his property. On April 22, 2024, investigators dug up a spot at Larry's home and found their bodies. That same day, Larry suffered a medical episode and was rushed to the hospital where he was pronounced dead.